The reading is from John chapter 21, beginning at verse 15. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he says, "you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus had asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep. Very truly I tell you, when you were young, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you to where you do not want to go." Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, "Follow me." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
So I am not a morning person in any way, shape or form, but I love the fact that in the passages around or just after the crucifixion, the resurrection, some of the incredible things happen in the morning. We see that Mary is meeting Jesus at the tomb early in the morning, and this evening we think about another morning meeting, or maybe it's just very late at night. This evening I want us to think about what for me kind of completes the gospel picture. And I know Andy and I are almost kind of swapping in spaces because Andy's going to talk about Peter's issue to begin with, but hopefully we're familiar enough with what Peter did to then help us think about Peter tonight. As you would probably expect, after the crucifixion and the resurrection, but before Pentecost, so this is the space the guys are in, the disciples find themselves at a bit of a loose end. They don't really know what to do. They thought life was going to go in a certain direction with Jesus. And then in the course of a weekend, the whole thing has been turned upside down. The Lord, their friend, their rabbi, has been killed. And that's devastating. But then he is resurrected, and that's incredible. But in those periods when the risen Jesus is not with the disciples, I suppose for them the question is, what are we meant to do? How does seeing the risen Jesus make them feel, considering what happened in the garden, what happened in the trial? So I don't know what you do when you're at the loose end. What do you occupy your time with when you don't know what else to do? Maybe that never happens in your life. For me, I find a book, and I bury myself in an armchair. But you've got this body of men and women who have spent the past 3 years following Jesus everywhere. They eat with him, they journey with him, they sleep with him. And through that, they've been the disciples of a rabbi. And this has meant that the disciples have got a certain modicum of respect. To be a disciple of a rabbi, you were regarded as the best of the best of the best. You were seen as someone who had studied well, you were seen as someone who is intelligent. For a rabbi to pick you, to follow them, must mean there's something special about you as well. And although most of these guys were not well studied, well read, were not maybe particularly intelligent, Jesus had elevated them to that place when he called them. But now what? What's going to happen? What does the future look like? And part of what I love about these disciples is we see these guys deciding to do what they are most familiar with. They go fishing. And so they head out at night and they fish all night and they catch nothing. When the morning arrives, their nets are still empty. But a guy shouts from the beach. He asks, have you caught anything? No, they reply. So he says, yes, well, cast your nets out that side and you'll catch something. Now this was not uncommon. Sometimes fishermen would have had a spotter on the beach to kind of look across the waters and see where there possibly are shoals of fish. So it's not uncommon for someone from the shore to help you when it comes to your fishing. But I imagine on this morning, this figure at the beach has a smile on his face. Because he's been here with these guys before, doing this very thing before. And like them, they cast their nets over the far side, and lo and behold, their nets are full, so full they can't haul them into the boat. And at this point, the light bulb goes. John and Peter, they remember this happening before. They were fishing and caught nothing. Jesus told them exactly the same thing. Cast their nets to the other side and they were full to bursting. And John looks at the figure on the beach and says, it's the Lord. Now, my niece is called Mary Fire. Don't know why my sister called her Mary Fire, but she lives up to every bit of that name. She'll either end up a serial killer or a prime minister. You can cut that out of the recording. Because if Mary wants something, there's no stopping Mary. So I remember a holiday, we're at the swimming pool in our holiday site, and there's a giant inflatable flamingo in the middle of the pool. And Mary wants on the flamingo. The problem is Mary can't swim. And the flamingo was too far into the pool for her to reach. That is not a problem for Mary, who runs and launches herself at the pink flamingo. She lands about halfway to it, and she sinks like a stone. So my job is to fish Mary out and place her back on the side of the pool. So I lift her out, I put her on the side of the pool, and as I'm turning back, the shadow goes over the top of my head as Mary relaunches herself towards the pink flamingo. Because if Mary wants something, nothing's going to stop her. I think I must have done it 15 times. But imagine in this place that, like Peter and John, John is turning to say to Peter, it's the Lord, as Peter passes him diving in and swimming to the shore. Peter has this great expectation, great love, great passion to see Jesus again. But we know he's also got to wrestle with what he did. And I imagine there's a lot of conflict within him. But his desire and his love of Jesus overrules that as he leaps into the water and he swims to the shore. And there we find Jesus sitting on the beach. He's lit his fire, he invites the disciples to come and have breakfast with him. And none of the disciples know what to say. I'm sure they're all a little bit in awe. And sort of sitting here, eating this freshly cooked fish, and no one really knows what to do. I suspect there's a combination of awe but also shame. Here is Jesus, the one they denied. The one they ran away from when times got tough in the garden. One of their own number betrayed him. What do you say in a moment like this? What words will suffice? And then, as we've had read this evening, then Jesus takes Peter aside. And I feel that in this conversation we really see the fullness of the cross and Jesus revealed. As we've heard read, Jesus asked Peter 3 times, do you love me? 3 times Peter replies that he does. I love the cheek of Peter. Because by the third one he's starting to get a bit annoyed. He doesn't see what Jesus is doing. You know, he starts to get a bit exasperated. And each time Peter tells Jesus that he loves him, Jesus gives him a job to do. Feed my sheep, care for my lambs. And at the end of it, Jesus simply says, "Follow me." So what's going on here, and how does the picture of what Jesus was doing on the cross get revealed, I think, in fullness here? For this, I think we need to put ourselves in the shoes of the disciples as they sit around this fire. They're deserters, they're deniers, they are the cowards, they are the ones who couldn't even stay awake. We did that in our confession this evening. They couldn't even stay awake in the garden. None stood up for Jesus, none publicly defended him. And now here he sits in their midst again. How would you feel? How do they feel? Yes, there would be awe. He's resurrected. But yes, there would be shame. On the cross, our sin is dealt with. In the resurrection, we see the confirmation that death has been defeated, and that Jesus is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. But after all that, how does God think of us? I wonder if you've ever considered the cross and wonder, how does God think? What does God think of me? Is he angry with us? That it was because of us that Jesus had to die on the cross? As a father myself, how would I feel about the person who caused my son to die? I think we can all imagine how we would feel about someone who caused a loved one to die. You know, we sing the line of the song, "It was my sin that held him there." How does that make us feel? How do you feel it was because of us that he had to die? The sinless, perfect Son of God. You know, the cross could leave us feeling desperately ashamed before God, that this is my fault. I imagine that this is how Peter is feeling. And then this is made worse because Jesus now asks him, in light of his denial, he asks him, "Do you love me?" Is Jesus having a dig at Peter? Is he trying to embarrass him? Well, Jesus is doing none of those things. We know, looking back at this passage, that Jesus is restoring Peter. Peter denied Jesus 3 times, and then Jesus leads Peter to confess publicly his love for him 3 times. And what we see at the simple breakfast is a beautiful moment of restoration and reconciliation. Jesus sits with Peter and removes his shame. What Jesus called out on the cross, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do," is personalised for Peter around this fire. He forgives Peter completely. You know, I have a scalp. I'm not going to lie to you, it's doing my head in, under my finger, and I've had it here for days. And it irritates me constantly, it annoys me. I've tried the old needle trick, I've tried tweezers. I've got to the point now where I'm just ripping skin off to try and get to it. I'm conscious of it almost all the time. I can't get the little blighter out. And it regularly catches me. And when I was writing this and thinking about my little scalp, maybe like this scalp, Jesus pulls that shame out of Peter's life, like removing a rotten tooth or a thorn from his flesh. It's easy to see our sin. It's easy to feel shame at our sin. It's easy thinking that God might be angry with us and pouring his wrath over us. It's easy to feel like that. But this breakfast on the beach reveals that this is not how God feels about us. On the cross, he draws our sin from us. On the third day, he revealed that he had drawn death from us. And on the beach, he draws shame from us. He tells us that this story is about restoration. He tells us that he loves us. And to prove what he thinks of us, I love the fact that he gives Peter responsibility. Here's the guy who has messed up, dropped the ball, wrecked the thing. And what does Jesus do? He gives him responsibility. Here with Peter, Jesus tells him what's going to happen later in his life. But this will have been a life lived in service to Jesus. And love at the end just simply says, follow me. How did Peter's journey start? With exactly those same words. Jesus came up to him and said, follow me. And Peter left everything and followed him. Now, after denying Jesus 3 times and abandoning him, Peter must have thought that Jesus would be done with him. You know, I feel this story keenly because it feels like my own story. I gave my life to Jesus at 16, was hugely blessed by a really supportive church, a great group of Christian friends. But when I moved away, I had neither of those things around me and I didn't walk closely with God. It became that kind of worst of things in the gospel. I'd lived one half of my life sort of in faith, and the other half I did whatever I wanted. And I did everything I wanted. As such, although I felt called to ministry really since childhood, I felt that I had grown. That God couldn't use someone with the failures that I had had. That God couldn't use someone who had let him down so badly. God couldn't use someone so broken and as sinful as me. Through the ministry of a number of friends, I went through a real breaking by God that released me back into believing in the grace of God and his willingness to use those who had messed up and had made mistakes, like Peter in this passage. I love what Jesus does here. He pushes further into fully restoring Peter because he recalls him, if you will. He renews his call of Peter, and in doing so he restores Peter to his commission calling. Follow Jesus with his whole life. Jesus is wanting to teach Peter that he is fully forgiven and he is totally restored in his relationship with Jesus. In shame, it can feel like we are hunched over with our backs turned towards God. We don't want him to see us and we don't want to have to look at him. We don't want to have to look him in the eyes. But in reconciliation, Jesus comes close to us and he takes us by the hand and he turns us around again and he turns us to face him. And facing him, he holds us and he holds us close. He brings us home. This image on the beach, it's not just for Peter, it's for all of us. In the cross, we need to see that our sin is dealt with and that our God is recreating us as one of his own children. He wants us to know that he loves us, that his heart towards us is not full of anger and rage because of the cross. He didn't save us so that he would crush us by his anger and our shame. He saved us to liberate us, to be all that he made us to be. He saved us because he loves us. And in fact, as many people do, by holding on to our shame or our guilt, we actually deny his recreating and his restoring work. We actually get in the way of the cross and its work, which was to liberate us from our sin and our shame and to reconcile us to God. Eating breakfast on the beach, for me, reveals a crucial part of the cross's work. Our recreation, our restoration, our reconciliation. It reveals God's forgiveness in its totality. It reveals what he thinks of us and what he wants to do with us. There is no anger or wrath here on the beach. There is only grace. There is only love. This is what God thinks of us. This is how God seeks to treat us. Frankly, I find it incredible. I find it amazing that in spite of who I am, he loves me and he wants to be in a relationship with me. So much so that he went to the cross. So as we move on in this Easter season, I want you to do so knowing that you are free. Whatever sin or shame that you've maybe been holding on to in your life, know that God wants you to be free from that. Shame and guilt from our past or our present can so often crush the spirit. He wants us to be free from all that went before and all that holds us now. And know that when we come before Him asking for forgiveness, that He is delighted to release us from that which drags us down. Because God's desire for each of us is that we live lives of godly freedom and fullness. That was the work of the cross: recreation, restoration, reconciliation, and then to release us into His service. Notice in this recalling and recommissioning Peter on the beach that he has work to do. All of us have been called into service. When I look back in my life, I thought, I cannot serve, I cannot work for God because of the things that I've done. He doesn't want me. He doesn't want me to work for Him. But in forgiving Peter, restoring him, He puts him to work. All of us here have work to do. All of us have the work to do of sharing the kingdom of God with others. It's too important to work for our shame or our guilt to hinder it. As Jesus restores and recommissions Peter, He does the same with us. So as we leave this beach, let us do as He asks. Let's leave knowing His freedom, knowing His joy. Let us leave unburdened and unshackled. Let us leave our guilt, our fear, our shame, our sin behind. Let us leave those at the foot of the